Well, thanks for coming back to part 2 of device connectors, and we'll just pick up right where we left off, and we finished talking about USB in part 1, and so let's continue the conversation here and talk about the rest of these 12 devices. IEEE 1394, make sure that you recognize this on the exam. So anytime they're talking about IEEE 1394, they are referring to FireWire. Now, FireWire, if you remember, is an Apple technology. It made a big splash when it first appeared, and it first appeared as FireWire 400. Now you could transfer data up to almost 400 megabits per second, and this is really about 393.216, but who's counting, right? So FireWire 400, you could transfer data up to 400 megabits. FireWire 800, of course, doubled that. We always need something faster, right? And so this took it up to almost 800 megabits per second, 786.432 to be exact. And then just make sure that you're familiar with these next two. FireWire 1600 promised to take us up to 1.6 gigabit per second, and FireWire 3200 up to almost 3.2 gigabit per second. Now, neither one of these, they appeared on just a few devices. 1600 did. I don't think 3200 ever appeared on anything, but 1600 was on a few select Apple devices, but it never really took off, but you still could see these on the exam. Next up is SCSI, SCSI. This stands for Small Computer System Interface. This is the standard for physically connecting devices and transferring data kind of within the computer. Now, when I say standard, I mean for faster, more high performance devices. This is where everybody goes next after they go SATA and some of those other technologies inside the box. Now here's the deal with SCSI. You can use up to 8 or 16 devices in SCSI, and it depends on the SCSI you're using. It could be standard SCSI, it'd be 8. Then there's wide SCSI, 16, ultra wide SCSI, and all this sort of stuff. So it depends on the SCSI interface and the type SCSI that you're running. And again, let me stress to you, if you've not used SCSI, if you're not familiar with it, just go read a little bit about it before taking the exam. They're real proud of SCSI historically on the A+ exams. You will see questions about it. It's a real cool technology, but there's a lot of little things about it that you'd be best prepared for. Just read it a couple of times before you go take the exam. Now, PS2 is a device connector that is really just a mini DIN 6-pin connector. It was replaced by USB later on. For quite a long time, this was the standard way to connect a keyboard and a mouse to a desktop computer. This has been replaced by USB and even Bluetooth now, but make sure you can recognize and you're familiar with PS2, which was really just a mini DIN 6. Now, a parallel connector is those wide, like 25-pin connectors that you see on the back of old computers. The Centronics connector, if you remember those, that we used to hook printers to. And a parallel connection or a parallel connector allows multiple bits to be transported at the same time in a parallel fashion. Think a 16-lane wide freeway. Okay, that would be 16 bits. One bit in each lane, and all 16 lanes can move forward at the same speed. Now that was an issue. Had to be clocked, things had to be moving at the same speed. They had to be assembled on one end, pushed through the cable, and then disassembled properly on the other end, or your data would lose its meaning. So parallel was the standard for a long time, but it got replaced by serial connections. Now a serial connection is where the data is transported one bit at a time sequentially through the wire. Now what's kind of interesting about this is it turns out that you could do serial a lot faster than parallel because you didn't have all the housekeeping that was involved. So just make sure you know the fundamental difference between parallel and serial. Now your audio connector is a 3.5 millimeter single jack like you see here, and notice this shows you both the male connector or the jack and then the port that it goes into. And this is just a standard 3.5 millimeter connector. And then of course everybody's friend for devices, the RJ45. This is standard twisted pair network cable. So those are the device connectors you need to be familiar with. Notice there's overlap with these, so some of them get easier than others. But again, just make sure you can recognize these by sight and you know just a little bit about them, the things I've pointed out here, and you should be able to navigate the questions about these things pretty easily when you go take the exam.